You can start here. Have you got my screen?
I have. I'll share them. Yeah.
You did take 4 years. That's right.
Bertrand, hello.
All right, thanks everyone. We're back.
Hold on.
We're not recording.
No, all good. Someone. All good. Go.
Okay. All right, this is our final session, and we're now moving on to seasonal predictions. So our first speaker is Oscar from the Bureau of Meteorology.
I just want to say a few things about Harry. We kind of met a few times, so I kind of know each other a little bit. I can't remember. I think I first met Harry in after Friday drinks in the bar, and Neville Smith came to me and said, "Oh, Neville Nichols has recruited a new scientist." I didn't know about that, or even recruiting somebody. And here he is, Harry Hendon. Yeah, and you two are going to be working together. And I thought, what? I think in those days, inter-team communication between teams wasn't kind of hot. Anyway, so coming from having been educated in the UK and worked in Europe, I hadn't really met many American scientists. So I hadn't worked with any American scientists. When I first was introduced to kind of straight shooting Harry, I thought, wow, this person I'm going to have to work with. So my first impression of Harry was so we'll come to that a bit later, whether that still applies at the end. Or they can't see things anymore. So Harry and I kind of led seasonal prediction teams, and teams' word kept changing because they kept having restructures, and then COVID came along and so on. But essentially, between the two of us, we led a group comprised of teams in some way around seasonal prediction research, model development, underpinning climate variability. We're quite integrated. I kind of tend to focus more on the systems, and Harry focused more on the underpinning science. It's kind of fair to say our scientists were quite closely with us. We kind of didn't really know which scientists belonged in our teams until we came to do the PDS at the end of the year and realized, oh, yes, so it's my team, so it's your team. So we kind of worked very much together. I think that was, that's the last 20 years really. I think Harry joined around 2001-ish. And today, even though Harry's not here anymore, and I'm not one of the team leaders anymore, that kind of group still exists today. They still meet regularly as a group, even though it's 3 separate teams, like by Debbie, Matt, and Claire. And I think what we started is still going really well today, thanks to Harry's kind of contribution to that partnership. And a few things there about Harry. Kind of regarded him as a science guru, to kind of just do everything about science that everybody went to. And I think as people already mentioned, science quality controller, he ensured that our science of the highest quality. I remember what Oompa mentioned before about Harry being a perfectionist, and one of my jobs was often scientists came to me and said, I think this paper is good enough, but Harry wants more stuff done. I kind of had to have a diplomatic way of convincing the scientists, okay, let's just do that a bit more and make it even better paper. And an exceptional mentor. He really dedicated a lot of time with scientists to make sure that the science was they had a chance to discuss the science of Harry and so on. And they've already mentioned Harry's food interest, and often when we had a Christmas lunch, there was always 2 tables, Harry's table and the other table, which was Harry's table. I made food which was so spicy, kind of caught fire. Always so strange, you didn't know exactly Well, so you're eating. So I kind of like to think of our partnership together as so a few more things. So in our kind of common effort around season prediction, we managed to get 5 new operational season prediction systems from POAMA 1 to Access 2. POAMA 1 is the first ENSO prediction system. POAMA 1.5, we were dabbling in rainfall prediction. POAMA 2 was the first rainfall prediction system. Then Access 1 when we entered into a partnership with the Met Office with much higher resolution models. And Harry was very dedicated to not just the science, but also the quality of these systems. And he was also central in the leadership of many external projects. Just name a few there. And I know talking to Harry, his memory is better than mine because there's some that I've missed that he's kind of talking about earlier on. So that it was quite central with many external projects. And we interacted a lot with customers and farmers, and they really loved Harry's straight shooting approach. He kind of was just straight and honest, and they really loved that interaction. And I think he enjoyed going to many user-focused workshops with some of our customers. So I just did a quick bit of spreadsheet last night. This is from, so we've got a website that has a list of all our publications around season prediction. There's probably a few missing from there, so don't take this as gospel truth, but it's approximately right. And I thought, like, well, let's see how many papers Harry co-authored, which is the blue, and as a part of the overall total. And you can see there's quite a lot of Harry's contribution and his co-authoring of papers in this area of seasonal prediction and climate variability was quite central to the work we did at the Bureau. And there I've listed every co-author from the Bureau that co-authored a paper with Harry in order in which they in time order. So the first one was Honga, Andrew, and so on, all the way to recent papers. Possible I made at least 1 or 2 apologies. And if your paper is not in that website, talk to Griff to get it on. So altogether, there was 86 plus papers and 44 Bureau co-authors. So Harry was really central to the Bureau's contribution to the literature. I kind of noticed this kind of dip here. I think this is when the Bureau started recruiting project managers to slow us down.
It's funny because it's true.
So coming back to this, is this a really appropriate picture to remember Harry? I think it is, but a slight modification. So I think it's a straight shooter, Harry, and just it's honest, straight, and makes his comments. I think a lot of scientists regard him as the oracle of climate variability, that he's the expert on that field that they go to for advice. He's dedicated to mentoring our staff at the Bureau and students, and also he's our quality assurance expert and made sure our science was of top quality. And I think hopefully that legacy will live on in the groups that still exist and still meet today, and that kind of legacy and what Harry the quality that he built over those last 20 so years will still carry on. Congratulations on your retirement, Harry. Hope for the best.
Thank you.
Now we have Andrew Watkins, who's know what your title is, and Steve Andrew, who's long-term collaborating with Harry at the Bureau of Meteorology. He doesn't know he's a see person.
Just putting on my Harry H. Hendon fan club. It's very special people who have known Harry for a long time. Given a 35-degree day, I'm hoping I survive.
If you stand here, people on screen can see.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll do it for you.
All right. So actually, what I'll do is I'll start off from the first slide rather than that one. So, oh, we've gone a bit too far. Look, now I'm losing all my jokes. I'll start off with my very first slide. So you get to the start. So Harry and I have worked together on many things outside of the science.
I think there's one
I think
before
there's
that.
one more before that. There should be at least.
Yeah, no,
Something's
okay,
going
before that. There.
There we go. Okay, so I'm starting off with probably one of Harry's favourite things to talk about when we've been talking to farmers and others, and that's of course that the moisture all comes out of the Eastern Indian Ocean, just comes straight up and streams all the way across and rains here in southeastern Australia. Isn't that true, Harry? Nice try. All right, we'll get on to more why that is a common perception, but in actual fact, Harry's life work has been to convince people otherwise. So next slide there, Deb. Thank you. So my initial experiences with Harry were interesting and various, because this rough American bastard came along and started telling me that we had to get rid of the statistical forecasting scheme and move to a dynamical one. And we had many discussions about this, even though I came from a dynamical modelling background, about how we do this and how actually we could deal with customers and give them the best possible product. Because it was a little bit emphatic, POAMA, originally. It was a bit 100% or 0% rather than necessarily being reliable. But of course, we ended up doing this in 2013. So we just saw from Oscar the transition. It was about 10 years after we first went into that dynamical modelling space. Of course, we finally made the move. And that's enabled us to move to the service that we have today. And it's so has such a great take up. We get around 20 million hits each year on the website. It's effectively from Harry's work. But if we go to the next slide, this is where we had most of our meetings. This, for those ladies in the room mightn't recognise, this is the men's change room out in the bike locker down below. Harry and I did have many conferences in our underpants. Pretty much right there. I consider this the Harry H. Hendon Memorial Fan. All cyclists know complain about the humidity in the room. But that locker room actually led to many great discussions and things which supplied to customers. So never discount the social side of the work of the environment that we're in, of course, and that became one of my favourite places for discussion. All right, in the interest of speed, I better keep going. Looking at things. So one of the big things that Harry and I did together, and that was a lot of fun as well, was every month speaking to the farmers. Now, I could only find stuff going back to about 2016, so I suspect that's when we started. And it started after, of course, the big drought that we had in 2015, and talking to farmers about, well, what's going on. And it involved me sort of being the straight guy, showing the maps and everything, Harry jumping in with the science behind it. I think that's what actually made it so popular with the users. It was a bit Chatham House rules, we wanted people to ask what they thought were dumb questions, and we never treated them as dumb, but we always answered them in the best possible way. But it was great. What they loved the most was when I would say something and Harry would go, "That's wrong, Watkins." And then give the correct answer. But some of the great insights, and maybe we'll move on to the next slide, some of the great insights that came from it, this is one that I think we should be very, very proud of. A lot of work by UNPA, I know, and many others, of course. But in the August 2019 climate briefing to these farmers and so on, Harry started saying, hey, this stratospheric warming event that's possibly happening is really similar. It looks really similar to 2002. And he started talking with them and showing them graphs, and I think they got a bit confused at times, but we ended up convincing them, watch out for fires in the summer of 2019, watch out for drought and so on. And of course, we all know what happened in the summer of 2019-20 with the Black Summer. But as early as August, this is what Harry was leading the discussion about and getting these guys involved and talking about the uncertainty with it too. But that, there was some recent research that suggested SAM wasn't sort of a couple of weeks decorrelation scale. It was actually something we could look months ahead and give us a pretty good outlook. And that led to the next slide. After some discussions and realising how excited these farmers were, that led to this conversation article, which I still can't believe had over 800,000 readers. Like how does something so sort of normally in nature or whatever end up with that many readers? Really 20,000 Facebook shares. I mean, this is quite phenomenal for something that's quite a science article. And I think we should be pretty proud of getting the message out in that understandable way, not just in that science way. So we went from talking to farmers to something like this. The other things, of course, that we talked about quite often, and this was in April 2020, what's the chance of going into La Nina? And Harry was with the farming folks and that was saying, hey, you know what? We might at the moment be actually looking at conditions that aren't La Nina. If you start thinking about taking out the global mean and looking at it a slightly different way, accounting for climate change, hey, watch out, we seem to be dipping into a La Nina there. So again, this discussion, even with the uncertainty around it and everything, actually was a lot of foresight in it and was a great service to them and what they understood or what happened over the following years. And then I think maybe the next slide, I'm getting to the end. And the other thing about thinking about our climate drivers, and there's a real perception out there with our farmers and others that, you know, if the IOD hits positive 0.4, then all of a sudden magic happens in the atmosphere and it turns dry in Australia. But trying to convince them around, hang on a minute, there's lots more than just simple climate drivers out there. And Harry was the one that was sort of pointing out that for 3 years, we had this weird cooling off Australia, warming over in the other parts of the Indian Ocean basin. And then in actual fact, it doesn't come across as a technical IOD, but it kind of was an IOD-like pattern. And that could explain a lot of what we saw. And going back to that initial slide, of course, what Harry was always trying to get across to these people is it's just not as simple as picking up some moisture and dumping it somewhere else. In fact, often what we really are doing by heating or cooling one part of an ocean basin is actually changing, like dropping a stone in the pond and creating ripples, changing the weather patterns downstream of that area. So in actual fact, that stream of moisture is more from the convergence of the weather systems in an area, not quite physically creating moisture across. Hopefully I'm almost at my last slide. And so I got this photo, not just because it's got my daughter in it, not just because Harry's so happy, but this is Harry in his modern happy place down there at Sandringham, hanging on to a pinky snapper. That's a snapper. Yeah, that's a snapper. Okay. But the point here being more that, you know, in terms of talking to these farmers, these stakeholders and so on, what I was really proud of is that we didn't just hand them a fish and tell them what the seasonal forecast was going to be, leave them to their devices. We actually were teaching them how to look skeptically, in a healthy skeptical way, at climate information and understand risk. And so we were really trying to teach them how to fish rather than just handing the fish. And I think we should be very proud that there's a whole bunch of people out there now who are out basically spouting these ideas. Peter may have to speak on something similar about understanding uncertainty and taking our information out to the public and giving them a far better understanding of actually what climate science is. So thank you, Harry. I have missed you a lot since you've gone. Chris Lucas and others are fantastic, but your expertise and so on was greatly appreciated. And there was a call at one time for the Harry and Andrew podcast to be delivered to the farmers and so on. So thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew. All right, our last science speaker today is Peter Hayman from the South Australian Government. So thank you, Peter.
Thanks very much. And so Peter Hayman and I work in study in climate applications. So firstly, it was just a real privilege to be asked and an easy answer to say yes to come across from Adelaide. Early on I've been working with Harry in the Forewarners Forum project with Andrew and Deb and Oscar and others. Early on in that with COVID, we had this Zoom call when we went around the room, the sort of Zoom room, and everybody said how great this was. They didn't have to travel, and all us introverts were saying we were happy just being at home. We came to Harry and he said, I hate it. He said, I can't go swimming. I need to go to work to talk to people and so on. And that was really early on. And I think by the end of the time, everybody was just so much with Harry on that. And so I think being here in person is really important. The request was to sort of inform and entertain. I think it's the BBC mission statement. And that's really any conversation with Harry, you walk away, you're a bit informed and you're entertained. And so Matt spoke about Harry's 2 most influential papers. There has to be the other end of the scale. And I think I might have Harry's least influential paper. You may or may not know, but this TROPAG is a very important conference to some of us and Harry and I were offered to do a combined program on that, and we had 15 minutes or something. And he said, Peter, look, I'll give you the whole time, you know, and so it was a combined paper. You missed out on a nice tote bag and a TROPAG apron, which I threw out only last week, which would have given here. So there's a author, Maria Carmen Lemos, who writes about making science useful, making climate science useful. And she makes a point in the introduction that you can find some people in some universities who say, I don't care at all about how my science, so they're doing some theoretical physics or something, and they're sort of proud about the fact that their science is not going to be used by anybody. It's just to sort of understand the world. But what she makes out the point is that that group is incredibly small. Most people who do a PhD want their stuff to be used by somebody. And I think that your work has had a point of being used and made a difference to many people that Andrew has mentioned there. Looking at the application, and certainly working in the Bureau and providing information has had that big impact. Harry was great to work with, patiently explaining to us dummies what was going on and so on. The Harry and Andrew show was wonderful, but also that sort of confidence with the nuance and the uncertainty and being clear on that. Harry was great company, is great company. Such a wide knowledge of coffee. So any conversation you had with, like, Harry was just knew a lot about it. So it was coffee, talking about movies. Harry knew about movies, cycling, Sri Lankan cuisine. I went to, with my wife, went to series, and suddenly Harry knew all about Sri Lankan cuisine and so on. And not in a boasting way, but just had this really deep knowledge of all these different things. Just to humour us, sometimes he'd ask some really dumb questions about agriculture. So I'm sure he sort of gone ahead and worked this out, but not about all of agriculture, because when it came to the right bit of Pinot Noir in Tasmania, Harry was extremely knowledgeable and or getting smoked tate out of wine. But some other aspects, it was some wonderful ways to make us feel a little bit cleverer. Knowing stuff and explaining is tricky. And it's tricky when you're explaining it to people who are going to make decisions with that stuff. There's a Dunning-Kruger effect, which is this famous experiment where the less people know about something, usually the more confident they are. It actually applies to the Dunning-Kruger effect, apparently. So Dunning does this experiment where all these management scientists have used, management consultants have used his ideas in the Dunning-Kruger effect. So Harry's serious knowledge about this stuff has also come with the uncertainty. You put us on to the comet with the work with Susan Joslin about using the forecast and the uncertainty of it, explaining prior to onset that the models are the weakest, but that's when the models are most useful, because once onsets happen, we know what's happening. The plume is a forecast. The forward is forearmed products that show the spread that you're saying, make sure that we understood that as we go into the next fortnight and so on, the spread returns to climatology and so on. All that information is there. Your sort of sense that this simplistic idea of climate drivers being just all we need to know. And that's a bit more complicated than that because there's a danger with climate drivers. We just get this simple causal thinking. Tim Palmer has written this. I mean, somebody from outside of climate science put me onto this wonderful book by Tim Palmer called The Primacy of Doubt. And he's written this, it's called How the Science of Uncertainty Can Help Us Understand the Chaotic World. So rather than saying how there's science and then there's a bit of uncertainty with that, but actually what you have is the science of uncertainty. David Cash, who's talked about this idea of communicating stuff, talks about salience, credibility, and legitimacy. So what we all do is this trade-off between we want to be relevant to end users, and so we tend to sort of try and say more about what we think is going to happen than what we should. So I have this sort of image of Harry's eyebrows that go up. If we're sort of what something's sometimes been said. Is that really true? Can we really be that? What do we pass that? As we try and be more salient, we trade off some of that credibility and so on. And I think that from that is this notion of also David Cash has its credibility, salience, and legitimacy. The notion of whose interests are at the table. And so with the farmers and the whole applied agricultural community, what we appreciated was that you weren't a corporate bureau person. You weren't saying this, we've got to talk about extremes because that's important to talk about the need to reduce emissions and so on. You were just talking about the science and how that could be most useful to decision making. So I just wanted to, and so there's a Neville Nichols put me on to Gert Gigerenzer. So there's a bit of these are all people whose parents liked alliteration. So Harry Hendon, Neville Nichols, so he has this thing about when we say 30% chance of rain, people misunderstand that. And because some of them are thinking it's going to rain 30% of the area. Some people think it's going to rain 30% of the time rather than 30% of the models are predicting rain. I think it would help if when I talk to farmers, we say 70% of the models are going for 70% of the ensemble runs or the model runs are going for wetter and 30% are going for drier. And the fact that we have we have climate scientists that have put their eminent thinking into models, making the models the best they are, and then just interpreting the ensemble run so that uncertainty is there, would help in our understanding that that's the information. It's both the signal and the uncertainty in that, in how we do that. So you've had a huge impact in the applied, how do we use this information? Because you've brought the rigor of that, you've said, hey, it's a bit more complicated than that, but also the idea that with that notion of the uncertainty and quantifying the uncertainty, there are some really good ways that we should be using that in our risk management. Thanks.
Timbal, who's head of
Research.
I get it right. For some closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot, Julie. And don't worry too much about the time. You know, as long as we've got Yumpa in the room, we can stay. I mean, Yumpa usually close the floor when she goes home. Okay, so she's still here, so we can stay. There's no rush.
Not 5:05. Not go.
But I do realize I'm the last man standing between all the great stuff that we heard this afternoon and the man himself. So got a bit of pressure. I know I need to clear the floor so Harry can say his word, and I'm sure he's going to have a lot of very nice things to say to us. The first thing I wanted to share with the room is that I'm very happy that this day happened, and a few people have to be thanked here for that to happen, because it was a bit hard to get Harry convinced that we should have that day. When Harry officially retired from the bureau, we were in the middle of COVID madness, a lockdown, impossible to do anything. And for somebody who unfortunately had a bit of a role in Harry retiring, I feel like it was a real great shame that we couldn't have a day like that. So I'm very, very pleased that we finally had this occasion to come together online in the room and celebrate what Harry has done for our field, what Harry has done for our organization here in the bureau in in depth and in style. So can I just add my few words on that? Unfortunately, I realized when many people were introducing their talk, they could all say the first time they met Harry, and I can't remember the first time we met. But I do remember one thing, and that has to do with Neville Nichols was sitting in the back because he was my team leaders at the time, probably one of the best team leader I ever had. After that, I had Harry, and I will come down a minute. But I wanted to say how good Neville was as a team leader. I think Neville did an MBA, if I remember well, at Marvel Spence Physics. When I asked him actually if I should do an MBA, I remember him telling me, yeah, sure, you should do that. I never found mine particularly useful, but you should try. Thanks, Neville, for the strong support. I did end up doing an MBA, and I think it's been of some use for me. But I remember very well when Neville told me, we've got this great guy coming over in the team, his name is Harry Hendon. And I was like, yeah, so what? We already had a lot of talent coming from the US. We had Matt, we had Julie. So another guys coming from the US, why not? And honestly, when Harry came, with all his dynamic background, I knew the name, I knew some of his paper, but I was working on statistical downscaling, so we were as far apart as possible to be. And it took many years probably before we started to work together. It took many years before we actually had a paper together. And that I really get to know what others talked about, Jim Pandora, that's yeah, getting a paper through with Harry is bloody hard. You know, I'm the champion to write a paper in a night, and with these guys, it's just impossible. We had to go on again and again and again. And but probably one of my few papers we had equation was a paper with Harry because we did also really fun. But so yeah, I couldn't remember the first time I met Harry, but after that, you know, we did quite a bit of work together, and over the years, we became a team leader. And so on my second page where I talked about some of the blind spots, but a team leader and a mentor. And I think many people use that word in the room. And for plenty of us in this room, you've been a fantastic mentor and told us a lot of things about scientific rigor and also communication. So the work we did together had a lot to do with all the climate processes, all the stuff that Andrew talked about, and communicating mostly to another set of customers, which were all the water industry, all the people who have to do the policy decision when it comes to water in Australia, in the southeast of Australia. And I think that was a real eye opener about, you know, the quality of the communication that Harry brought in this conversation, because many people said that before. Harry doesn't cut corner. It's tricky things to explain. He will get on and explain that to our stakeholders. And I think he was appreciated for that because he could really go very, very deep into topics, and people were listening to him. I'm sure plenty of executives politely said, yes, I didn't have this explanation and never understood what he was saying. But many, I'm sure, did, and actually grew up in their own work in plenty of organizations, MDBA, MDBC before that, and in many organization departments here in Victoria, with whom we had a lot of conversation. And I think Harry has been instrumental for a lot of things that has happened in relation to what the Bureau has been doing. So for all that, I think, you know, us in the Bureau, because I'm still in the Bureau, and I noticed some people can be a bit critical about our project management. Sorry, but you know, this organization has benefited immensely from Harry work and contribution. We heard a lot of compliment about Harry Science, and they all absolutely justify and deserve, because the amazing thing that I noticed today is that we went through a lot of stuff, and every single field Harry raised to international prominence. You know, he was out there with all the top guys writing some of the top papers in so many different fields that is absolutely amazing. And I cannot think about too many people who have such diverse, rich and influential career. Well, nobody did that, so I'm going to focus on few blind spots, because you know, when you've got Harry as a team leader, it's very, very interesting. So I think some of my skills are inversely correlated to his not in interest in doing things. So do you know how to use Excel now?
Doesn't need to.
Do you know how to do a budget? I have asked her. Yes. So I think I learned a few things when Harry was my team leader. He's very good at delegating, actually. When he's not interested, he does it very well. So I ended up doing quite a few of those things, and actually I appreciate that relationship because, as Andrew said, you know, there was a science figure, there was science strengths, and other people can do the rest. And clearly there was some stuff that Harry wasn't interested. You drag him to an administrative meeting, you know what's going to happen. You know, Harry's not going to stay focused during the whole meeting. That's pretty clear. During all those times, then we run the CIK and VK meetings. I've got a couple of memories of that. I think particularly I remember one meeting with the chair by Peter, who is in the room here. But it was in the room over there. Just people can go there in the boardroom. Peter was at the head of the table. Was sitting on one corner and Harry was in the other corner. Before any of those meetings, by the way, I came into the habit of printing 2 sets of the agenda and all the paper, because for sure, at some time before the meeting, Harry will come to my office and say, hey, do you have any paper for this meeting? Harry, here's your paper. You've got another 6 minutes to figure out yourself. This was going to happen, so here you go. So in one of those meetings, Harry wasn't really taking a lot of notes for this meeting, but I suddenly was scribbling and writing. I said, no, it will be something really important. He's taking notes. So I paired with it, and no, he wasn't taking notes. He had actually put down a differential equation, and he was trying to remove some numbers so he could actually have a go at one of the terms and try to maybe understand the process a bit better. We were probably talking about some, I don't know, communication process or whatever, but Harry's mind was somewhere else. And for me, to summarize a lot what I found fascinating with Harry is that the mind was always going. He was really deep into the science, and he was of high relevance. But there was a couple of stuff that he was not interested in, and that's fine. Some people could do that. But just to finish it off, I wanted to, thank you for all the conversation that you offered me and plenty of other people. I remember there was basically a queue in this corridor waiting to get to your office. All of us had to take turn basically to be able to go there and talk about, I remember this figure that they've done some show about, some influence on the rainfall and talking to you at length about what matters in the, is that an easterly anomaly or the fact that the westerly are not as strong or something. At the end of the day, we all agree that circulation matters if you want to understand rain. But other conversation were about, and I think it was mentioned by your PhD advisor, conversation about the snow quality. What is the best snow to go skiing? Are there in that Utah or that okay? I think we never saw that conversation, but we both agree that ski touring is the best way to find the right cover. And conversation about wine, many people mentioned that what's the best drop of red. At the end of the day, I think we agree that doesn't really matter. It's a good company and we can have that. So hopefully we will later on today have a few class to enjoy. But before I go, I wanted to thank the people who put that event together. Yumpa in particular was, as usual, done a tremendous amount of work, but heavily supported by Julie, by Matt, by Debbie, and by Griff. So thanks for you guys, and thanks a lot for everything.
Heard a lot about Harry's elements. And one thing we haven't heard is actually some of the influence he's had within the organisation in terms of strategic advice. I know this will be echoed by Neville Smith and Tom Keenan as well, that and Graham Hall as well. We always valued Harry's advice. We used to have to write a trip report at the end of every international trip. Harry's were always worth reading because there was always strategic insights that made a difference to the strategic directions of the Bureau. And I'd say I'd just like just to add that another element of Harry's strategic advice that was really important for the way the Bureau's gone. And I want to thank you for that, Harry.
I had prepared a whole bunch of stuff to say, but I think it's too much. So I first want to start with thanking the organizers here. And first, where did Bertrand go? First, Bertrand. He really did have to twist my arm to do this. I'll drop a few names here. It reminds me, I had a conversation with Roll Madden's wife, Maggie. It was about 10 years ago. Maybe Matt remembers. They were out here for a meeting. Yeah. And she said, she said, we got to know her and Sharon got to know her. We were friends with him. And she said to me, you know, Roll never liked calling it the MJO his whole career. To him, it was the 40 to 50 oscillation. But as soon as he retired, he got right into it. He loved it. He loved it being called the MJO. So I was sort of like that. It was sort of hard for me to sit there through all of that, but it was, thanks for doing it. And I don't really know in the Bureau who did it all, but I think Matt, Julie, and Debbie.
Andrew Marshall as well.
Andrew Marshall, Oompa. So yeah, thanks. It did mean a lot to me for you to put this together. I'd also like to thank all the speakers and especially the ones who came from outside the Bureau. So we heard from Peter, quite a few were online. Dwayne put together something, Shidong, Ragu, who's just one of my favorite people, even though he thinks I don't remember him. Who else? Oh, Dennis and Brandt, of course. Who else did I miss? Sakwu, Ming Fang. Yeah, it's just great that these people decide, put the effort in to make their presentations. And again, it reminded me of something CP Chang told me. So some of us knew CP Chang because he would twist our arms to contribute chapters to his monsoon workshop, which I think he ran about every 4 years. And after the first time he ran it, he came up to me and said, I can tell you're a really good scientist by the friends you keep. And I thought, well, that's an interesting way to judge people, but it is true. I mean, the people who made these presentations are just all outstanding scientists. And I'm really fortunate and proud that I was able to be friends and collaborate with such a diverse group of outstanding people. I can tell lots of interesting and funny stories. I'm looking at Mark, so I should tell the story about Mark. So I do want to say something about my education, and it sort of relates to this. But yeah, so Mark showed up at the University of Washington when I was a graduate student. I was in my second year when Mark showed up to do his master's with Bob Howes, who I think he had met at Winter Monarchs. Was that? Yeah.
Yes.
And Brant Liebman, who you got to know, who's quite a character, convinced Mark to come and play on our softball team, which was our intramural team, and we were good. We'd won the championship before. And Brant said, Mark, come on, you got to play. We need another player. And this was my first introduction to cricket. So Mark shows up, never having held a baseball bat in his life. And he, first time up to bat, he takes guard like we're playing cricket. But he learned how to bat, and he always got a hit. Anyway, I mean, I tell stories about everybody, but I do want to say something about my education. And it sort of goes back to my parents. My parents really valued our education, and I see my 3 sisters are online. And it's probably a pretty rare family where 4 kids in one family all got degrees at the University of California. So my oldest sister and I went to UCLA, my second sister went to UC Berkeley, and my youngest sister went to UC Santa Barbara. And, it does really reflect the focus on education that my parents had. And, it started when we were young, but it was, we're really fortunate for that. And that education that Grant and I had at UCLA was really something. I didn't really appreciate what I was getting myself into at UCLA. I was growing up as a surfer, and I got interested I thought I was going to become a wave forecaster, which fortunately, at some point, I was looking for Diana. I finally published a paper. I was a co-author with Andrew Marshall on, the MJO and waves. But I thought when I was 15 years old that I was going to, study meteorology and learn how to forecast waves. And the reason was we lived in San Jose, Saratoga, over the hill from Santa Cruz. And so to go surfing, you had to drive 25 minutes, and there was no surf reports or forecasts. And you just showed up and there was the surf. And I just got fascinated. Where was the surf coming from? And I thought that's what I was going to do. And at the time, the only place in California you could study meteorology was at UCLA. So I said, well, I'm going to UCLA. I didn't really do any research about it, but little did I know, this was a really hard degree at UCLA. And I learned about 15 years later, I'd gone out back to UCLA and talked to Professor Unai, and he was bemoaning how their undergraduate degree had changed so much since when I was there. He said, well, now our degree is just a survey course in climate science. Not like when you were here, it used to be it was the expected training that UCLA wanted for their students to go on and get a PhD at UCLA. And so the degree was a physics degree until our 3rd and 4th years when we were fortunate to be able to take electives in meteorology. But up to that point, it was just hardcore math and physics, and it was really hard. But we were fortunate that, you know, these courses they taught at UCLA as an undergrad were, you know, essentially the first year courses that we had at UW as graduate students. And you know, we had radiative transfer, planetary atmospheres, cloud physics with Hans Krupacher. I mean, the list went on. It was just fantastic education. And of course, Brant had done this research of where to next. I didn't know anything. Brant said, "Look, we're going to go to UW. It's the only place on the West Coast that has a decent program." So I believed Brant, and I just signed up and went to UW. And of course, I always thought Brant and I were Hartman's first and second students. We were second and third. Turns out, yeah, there was a guy named Starlett Thompson was his first. But you know, again, the education we received at UW was just, you know, you just pinch yourself when you think back to that time. You know, the faculty was Holton and Wallace, Leovy, Howes, Dick Reed, Bob Charlson. You know, just the list went on and on. It was just amazing. And I think equally important as the faculty there, just because their reputation was so great, was the number of visitors that came through. And in my first summer there, the two key visitors that really affected my career was Brian Hoskins and Adrian Gill. Now, Hoskins showed up and he was working on the first draft or the draft of David's paper, Hoskins and Crowley. And he'd written this thing out, you know, with Hoskins and Crowley on a yellow pad and you know, longhand. And he turned it into the department secretary there and she typed it and it was exactly as Hoskins had written it down in his pad. But Hoskins circulated this first draft around to all the graduate students, said, yeah, give me your opinion. I thought that's pretty good. And I didn't know anything. So that paper came out in 1980. Adrian Gill, of course, was Australian, and what was the saying about? No, I better not say that saying. Adrian Gill showed up that same summer, and of course, his Gill 1980 paper had just been published, or was about to be published, and he was there with Hoskins for that entire summer. And the third paper that really had a big impact on me was the Edmonds, Hoskins, and McIntyre. Now, of course, Hoskins and McIntyre weren't from UW. But Harry Edmonds was the support scientist who just happened to be working at UW. And that paper's on the EP flux, the first paper on the EP flux. And Harry Edmonds just happened to be the programmer that Holton and Wallace assigned to Hoskins and McIntyre to make the plots for their paper. But all those three papers came out in my first year as a graduate student, and they were with me the rest of my career. So I'm really grateful for that. And of course, you know, Dennis was our advisor, and it's Dennis, you know, he went on to become a member of the National Academy and so on. He was just brilliant. And it was really an honor to actually say that I was his, you know, second graduate student. I always thought I was his first. Yeah, so I think I better keep this short and leave it there. There was probably other people I wanted to say. Oh, I know the key thing I want to say. You know, there was some talk about what I should talk about. Matt said, "Oh, talk about the paper that meant the most to me," or something. I don't know. But I thought about what am I most proud about working at the Bureau of Meteorology, and it was being involved in this enterprise of developing the seasonal prediction. Well, I should say the development of the seasonal prediction enterprise. As Oscar pointed out, when I joined in 2001, in fact, I do remember how we met. We met online, actually. You were in charge of the BMRC annual meeting, and you got wind that I was coming to the Bureau. And so you sent me a message saying, you need to give a talk at the Bureau annual meeting. And I said, what's it about? He says, it doesn't matter, just give a talk. That's how we met. But it wasn't my job, actually, to be involved in seasonal prediction when I got here. And to be honest, two reasons I really got involved in seasonal prediction. One is I just love prediction science. I just, it was something I grew into and just was fascinated by it. But the other was I saw it as a way to get out of having to do, I saw it as a way to protect my science from, Bureau bureaucracy. Thanks. Everyone always used to say to me, how do you do that? You just write these papers and all this different stuff. But it was always, a lot of it, you showed that nice plot, a lot of it had to do with making use of our seasonal prediction tool and around that science. And Yeah, so it really was a conscious decision, but it is what it really I'm most proud of. We sort of went from, you know, just Richard Kleeman's model to predict El Nino to now making these really valuable, you know, probabilistic forecasts, you know, from days to seasons ahead. And the person I enjoyed working with the most at the Bureau was Oscar, because at that time, maybe you've changed. You were really fearless in your approach to our science. The things that you did and we did with that POAMA system were just remarkable. You know, it was this T47 system, and the only system that was better, well, we were better in a lot of ways, but the only system that was better at all was at ECMWF, which was running much higher resolution. And it was all of Oscar's clever ideas about ensemble generation and coupled assimilation and this real focus on the product development, and it was everything. And it was just, it was a really exciting time to be involved in our science. And I think, you know, we've ended up in a good space. We really are, the Bureau really has one of the best seasonal prediction enterprises of any place around. So I did want to say, yeah, I still am really proud to say that I had worked at the Bureau of Meteorology, and it's because of the people that really makes the Bureau a great place. Yeah. And I have to say, near the end there, my highlight of working, you know, my highlight of my month was with Andrew doing our spiel. It was just, I loved it. You know, Andrew would make this really serious presentation and all these things, and I could say whatever I wanted. Yeah, so finally, of course, thank my family. You know, I've jerked them from Melbourne to Boulder and back to Melbourne, and it's, you know, it's been quite a journey. But you know, couldn't have had the career I had without my family, and especially Sharon. This is a true story. When I showed up, Alan Plum hired me at CSIRO, and I used to always like to say that Sharon, I married the second woman I spoke to in Australia. I don't know that that's actually accurate, but what is accurate is, you know, the business manager at CSIRO told me, well, just report to the business office Monday morning at 9 o'clock. This guy named David Slater, and I showed up there, and he made me sign all these forms and everything. He says, all right, I'm going to give you a tour of the place, but the first thing I'm going to do is take you to the most important person at CSIRO. Okay, so I think I'll leave it at that. I'm so appreciative that people found the time to come here. You know, I look around, I just see stories and names. I could tell a story about Peter Baines. He was the first person to ever interview me, as far as I know. I don't know if he knew that either. I had applied for the job at UW, and I never heard back from Alan. And I got this phone call with this Australian guy on the line. It's Alan saying, well, I'm going to offer you a job at CSIRO, but this guy, Peter Baines, is coming through Washington, and he's going to come and talk to you first. I said, okay. And I found out later, Alan said you were essentially interviewing me. You know that. And I remember I had spread out all these plots on these two tables. I had a gazillion plots, but I didn't know what was going on. It was for my third chapter of my thesis, and there were hundreds of plots. And I showed you them all, and you were being very patient with me, just nodding your head. But it worked. Anyway, so thanks for coming, Peter. That goes way back, actually.
I'm doing it very interesting. One thing I would like to know is when is when is the Vardina thing going to come to?
Yes. Harry, help us now.
I would, you know, I looked yesterday. I think if you use this concept of relative SST, it's still on Nina. So if you take out the tropical mean, you know, because there's this ongoing background warming, that the temperature threshold for convection is going up. The temperature going up everywhere. It still looks like La Nina, though the forecast model is definitely making it slosh. So soon. Oh, you remind me, somebody wanted to know, yeah, well, what are you going to do in retirement? I forget who asked that, but I guess I should think about it. I'll tell you what we're thinking about. Partly we don't know. I think, you know, you always talk about when you retire, well, you're going to go travel. But, you know, as a climate scientist, you can't go off and travel like you used to, I don't think, not with a, you know, not sort of ethically. So I was trying to figure that out. You know, how much long haul travel can we actually do? You know, we're going to do a lot less than we can afford, that's for sure. But I don't know. That's it's really sort of thrown me personally for a loop, that we've gone through this era where you could just jet off around the world and not think about it, to realizing now that, you know, that's not the best thing you could be doing. So I don't know, we have to sort that out. Of course, when I quit the Bureau, I bought a fishing kayak and I spent a lot of time in the ocean. I love the ocean. I grew up surfing, and now I can't surf, but I can go out in my kayak in the ocean. And I love being on the ocean as much as I do actually catching fish. So catching fish still is pretty fun. I don't know what else we're gonna do. It's, yeah, we're still trying to sort that out, but it's, yeah, it's, you know, we got a lot of years left in us, so we'll end up doing something. So I would thank you again, and I just can't tell you how great of experience, what an honor it was, and how proud I was to say I worked at the Bureau of Meteorology. It's just a great institution. Thank you.
Thank you. So everyone, the refreshments are outside. Thank you everyone online who came along. Thanks to everyone again in the room. Congratulations, Harry, and enjoy retirement. Could be the John Farnham of climate science and come back. And but in the meantime, enjoy.
Thank you.
All right, let's pull this to a close. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. There's plenty of refreshments out there.
Thanks all.
Congratulations. I was wanting to know what people were saying.
Yeah.
All the best, Harry.
I thought David Crowley.
Yeah, well, we're going to try.
People say how to do it.
Maybe I will be even one in case people are typing.
Yeah, that was.
Is it ready?
Thank you, Harry. Thanks, Harry. He's waiting.
We'll save the chat.
Time's up. Somebody might need to extend the online meeting.
You know, it's that's awesome. It's only 15 people. Probably end at 9.